All right, our Future of Motorsports panel, maybe they can figure out how to get better Velcro for me next year. All right, again, this panel filled with folks that have been longtime supporters of RTBC, and you'll hear me say that time and time again, but it's very important. We wouldn't have an event without a lot of the folks that have embraced this for many, many years. And that includes the folks at Smith Fence. Been one of the big sponsors for many, many years, and we miss the person who made that all possible for us. So, but here I'm going to let you guys introduce yourself. Colin, lead off.
Good morning. I'm Colin Brame with Smith Fence Company. We have been running in the racing world since the late 80s, and our most recent one is Las Vegas, but working on a couple other ones in Phoenix, Richmond, Darlington, Milwaukee Mile, kind of all over the place right now. It's been a very busy year for us, and we couldn't be more grateful.
Ruthie.
Ruthie Culbertson. I think this is 30 years of motorsports for me, so I don't feel very future of motorsports. I feel more like sustainability and recycled, I think is where I'm kind of leaning towards. But I have a number of years in promoter support, racetrack support, event production. A lot of wonderful faces in here today that I recognize, which is outstanding. Worked for multiple different racing series, so I kind of have the approach of I'm worked for 4 different racetracks this year, so I'm a little bit well-rounded in terms of sanctioned bodies, racetracks, marketing, digital. What haven't I talked about at one of these conferences?
You've been on many different panels. You're like our Swiss Army knife.
Yeah, I can't say I'm a genius
panelists.
at any one of them, but I'll try to help you wherever I can.
Thank you very much. Christian.
Thanks for having me again. Christian Epworth Tilke. I work with a company that we design racetracks. I think we have over 100 racetracks that we designed and built actually in the world. I've been lucky enough to work now for 20 years for Tilke. I've been here on the panel, I think 10 years ago or 12 years ago, I think when we just finished Circuit of the Americas, which was our first Formula One track in the US. And since then, things have been crazy. There's a lot of movement, not only the Americas, but also worldwide, Formula One for sure. I think we're going to talk about that. And also on the private motorsports clubs that we're developing all over the world.
All right, Ruthie, I'm going to start with you. Why are street circuit events becoming some of the largest growth events in motorsports right now? Seems like everybody wants to put one on.
Well, there's a catch-22 to street circuits, as those who have one will know and understand. The most obvious answer to that is you are bringing your product directly to the audience. So instead of trying to coerce people to come to you, you're literally taking your product directly to them. And the big key here is if you've got the budget, it can really work out well because you're actually, in the case of Las Vegas, they're entertaining an entirely new audience, most of them necessarily race fans. So you're engaging with an audience that's already there for whatever reason and bringing them into and educating them on a product that they haven't quite seen before. So that is a kind of a unique perspective on it. But I will say, most of you that are with road courses or short ovals, the catch-22 to it is a significant expense. I mean, you've got to buy all the infrastructure for it, and by the time you're by the block and the fence, you want to hide underneath your desk and not come out for about a month and a half. Let alone getting into the logistics of it. But, I will say one thing, I do a lot with Red Bull Formula One, and their new program that they're doing now, and some of you may have even been to one of, you've seen the show runs, Red Bull show runs they're doing globally. Their new initiative is they actually take the F1 car, they have a whole team dedicated just to taking the F1 car out, and they literally close down, we build mini track circuits downtown, we pick a market and literally build, it's water barricade and fencing. But you build a small mini circuit, and literally it's a week-long course build for a 2-hour show for the F1 car to go out and do about 2 hours worth of shenanigans, donuts, spin-outs, Daniel Ricciardo to run through an audience and behave poorly. But what's great about it, I will say, is, their target is product sales, right? They're focusing solely on Red Bull sales and product distribution. But it's working so well for them that their new plan is they're planning on doing 3 in the United States every single year. And they're also now doing, I think on average of 25 to 26 globally. and at a bill hefty tab around 7 figures for each production, clearly it is working for them, right? So, I think a number of different racing series are also starting to look at how, whenever they go into a market, how can they take a piece of their product and take it downtown or put it in a market or an area where, they can tap into a new audience. So, very long answer for yes, taking your product to the masses.
Christian, talk about the unique challenges that the Las Vegas street course gave you from a track design standpoint.
Las Vegas began actually with for us, almost 10 years going back and forth to Vegas. So this is not just happening by coincidence. We got a call in May 21 in the middle of COVID. Nobody from Formula One could travel because of travel restrictions. So they called me in South America. I was having vacation there, and I traveled to Las Vegas in May and did the first site inspection basically. And we tried to determine how can we put a racetrack in here. We knew we had to go on the strip, but then where do you put a pit building in? Such a huge facility basically, and everything that comes to a pit building. And that was the biggest driver of us. Fit it on the strip, get it there. The first meeting was with the Las Vegas convention people, and then immediately it said, well, guys, we are Las Vegas convention, but this city is managed by the 4 casinos. So immediately the first thing we did is we went to knock on everybody's door and had to convince them. The win was in immediately. MGM was supportive and Caesars wasn't at the beginning, and it was quite difficult to convince them, but once they signed them up as strategic partners, today they become the biggest beneficiaries. So I think people underestimate, and I think you say it's right, it's about setting up not only the logistics of the guardrails and the panels and everything. Working in Las Vegas was one of the biggest challenges, and I think there's a lot to criticize about maybe what happened there, but I think people don't underestimate how difficult it was to make this project happen. The racing ended up being very, very good. We had quite suffering on Thursday, which wasn't to be expected, but look, things happen, and we are super happy about the result.
All right, Colin, from a safety standpoint, what unique challenges do these street courses offer for a group like Smith?
Well, I guess we could probably sit here all day talking about how many of those pop up on us. Just to name a couple, though, when a design team like Tilke's trying to showcase the overtaking, the high-speed turns, or the top speeds that these cars can actually reach, the safety for the spectators is equally as important as the drivers and the teams that are on the track. So one of the issues, I would say, and Christian, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but on the street courses, the shorter runoffs, due to the civil space that we have to work on these things. But then, from a spectator standpoint, the placement of the grandstands or the trees that we're having to work around, the buildings that we have to put these tracks around, just to name a few. I mean, as far as the runoffs go, our product, the Safer Barrier, has proved to be very effective in those areas. And just what they do, it's mind-blowing how they can bring a group of people so close to the action, all while maintaining the highest level of safety for the spectators.
All right, Ruth, years ago, a famous promoter that you may or may not remember started the Bristol night race. And then we saw night races everywhere. And then we got to a point where I think there was a little oversaturation of these big events at night. Do we have the same fear of maybe oversaturating the street course market as well?
No, only because it's by nature, street circuits are cost prohibitive. So, having the organizations with enough backing and enough funding to be able to produce a street circuit, there's not very many of them, obviously, in the country, and there's a reason for that, because it is extensive. And then I suppose for the most part, everybody shares, like the fencing gets shared all the way across the board. You can't share a block, it's too hard to move, but almost everybody shares assets, trades assets, like in the case of Nashville GP. Jason's over there knee deep doing his thing. You'll hear from him later, but fencing is shared across Detroit. It's shared across a number of other different venues because it just makes financial sense. So I don't know that we're ever going to oversaturate it. Plus, there's obviously, in addition to the logistics he was just talking about, there are so many hurdles to get through. I mean, just the permitting processes alone in a city and the number of permits you have to file for street closures. And then getting into, to your point about night races, the TV windows, what you're working with in terms of a TV window and what's viable for opening and closing the racetrack. In the case of Nashville this year, which I know Jason will talk about earlier, we are actually having to open and close the track every single day in 2024. So we will close it down and open it up at night for cross streets and traffic because we're going to be on Broadway. So once you start adding up the nightmares, I mean, the reward is great. Don't get me wrong. I mean, the crowd, the fun, to your point, bringing people that close to the action, it is amazing, and the reward is always high. But the struggle to get it done and get it produced, I mean, you're up against quite a bit. So, and that's the reality of it, and that's why a lot of people don't. It's. I don't think you're ever going to oversaturate a street circuit just because of the logistics, the headache, the funding, the personnel, the staffing. The city has to cooperate. A lot of cities don't. It's business interruption, right? Anytime you go downtown and stick something downtown and say, hey, we're going to close all your streets, the first answer is, how do we get deliveries? If you're a grocery store, how do you get your product in the door? So there's a lot you have to do with, community meetings and community letters and making sure that you're everybody's amenable to the program before you can even get it on paper, before you even start to design it, before you even start to talk about the safety factors and safety initiatives. So it's a lot. It's extensive.
Very interesting.
I drink heavily.
That's good advice in a lot of ways.
In Vegas, we enclosed with the track 25,000 hotel rooms alone. So imagine how strong these hotels are. They have logistics coming in and out. They have the employees. So the first meetings were only about the logistics. So the only thing we talked about, it wasn't even selling a ticket. It wasn't only about that. It was only about how do we ensure that these hotels can operate, what happens in a case of emergency. So we had to build bridges like crazy. We met with a boring company from Elon Musk to see if we could dig tunnels in there. So I think everything that you said is it's 100% accurate. It's extremely difficult to do. In Formula One, I would say, on a worldwide perspective, I do see more street circuits coming. Today, just now, was an announcement they want to go to Madrid. So, and there are more announcements maybe to come. So in Formula One, I would say, on a worldwide perspective, that's for sure a trend.
Very interesting.
A lot of it too is education. Like the people you're working with in a lot of these cities have absolutely no comprehension of what you're bringing to them. I mean, I remember I had a conversation with literally a pile of city officials and a fire department that just kept saying, well, you've got these streets blocked. Where's the fire lane? Like, the street's closed. The whole thing's a fire lane. I mean, help yourself. So there's a lot of education process to that too. So, that's another one of the logistics and hurdles you're up against is, in addition to business interruptions, just explaining to people what it is you're even trying to accomplish.
Very interesting.
In the special case of Vegas, I'm looking forward to see the real numbers now coming back. I was there the entire weekend, and you could see people suffering. You speak with the Uber driver, the taxi driver. I would say 80% hated it. They really say, what are you doing here? This is not good for us. On the other hand, you speak to the casinos now. It seems that MGM had the best weekend ever in their history. It seems the Wynn had the best ever history earnings in that day. So if they are strong enough and they can make a case and demonstrate that this was beneficial to the city, it will happen. I hope it will. They have a commitment for 10 years. But the disruption was incredible.
All right. Years ago, are my folks from Audubon here today? All right. Years ago, I was at One Lap of America, covering that at Audubon, and there was a rain delay. So, of course, like all good media people, I found a place to hang out that was dry, and one of the owners of one of your garage mahals over there invited me in for breakfast. And I got to talking to him about why racing? Why racing as a business tool? And he said to me, well, Dennis, I've lost a lot of golf balls in the woods over the years. I still haven't lost a car in the woods. So we're seeing a growth of these private clubs around the world. It's not just here in the United States. Kristen, can you talk about how tough the challenge is when you're designing a private club type track where you're going to have a lot of gentlemen and gentle lady drivers and not a lot of experience sometimes. How do you make that track easy enough but challenging enough to keep people's interest for the long term?
How many hours do I have?
We got plenty of time.
No, just kidding. Look, we talked about the trend about Formula One going into street circuits. I think there's a huge trend in motorsports, private clubs. I think Autobahn was one of the first ones. Then we have Atlanta Motorsports Park with Jeremy sitting over there. And then we're talking about the future. We have the people from Flat Rock here. They are our clients and friends that are designing an incredible venue in Tennessee. And what we realized is these motorsports couple of clubs, they are very different than a Formula One street circuit. They are very different from an event venue. And we created 4 years ago a concept that's called the Motorsports Club of Clubs. I have a book here, happy to share that later on. In this book, basically, you will find over 30 private clubs that we designed. 14 of them are in operation today. And we are very proud about this achievement, really, because, like you said, it's not easy to bring a project from a vision to reality. Yeah. So, and this is because the business model now is working. It's shifting away from maybe ticket sales to a real estate project. Yeah, these projects are driven on a completely different business model. So we help them. We help clients basically in the entire journey from, hey, choosing the right piece of land, designing the right track, and I will come to your question then, to making it also a financial sustainable business. We meet once in a year with this conference, similar than this one. This year we had over 90 people meeting and discussing about the secret sauce to making it happen. To your question, Flat Rock may be a good example of how we design a racetrack. It has all the different flavors that you need. For example, the track will be a 6-mile track. Wow. And you will be able to split it into multiple configuration. The current status, I think the first 3.6 miles are paved, right? I think first 3.6 miles are paved, and it includes a 1 mile or a shorter loop, for example. So in the ideal case, you have the beginners starting maybe getting the traction over the short track, and then grow slowly over the bigger track.
Very interesting, and there's a lot of great examples of doing that quite well with some of these private tracks. All right, Colin, from a safety standpoint, what kind of unique challenges do these private clubs give, especially if they want to be able to reconfigure the track for different events?
I would say that are you talking about versus street course? And there's definitely going to be changes, and the designers, I think, are working with a blank canvas more so with the private course than they are versus street course, and the limitations are far less. So the necessary safety mechanisms that are needed are minimized on those private courses because you can have larger runoffs, because you don't have spectators surrounding the entire campus. A lot of the private courses, spectators are in the country club area or their private garage, versus thousands upon thousands of people all over the campus that you've got to focus on those safety efforts. So the most recent private course that we worked on was Motor Enclave in Tampa with the Tilke team. And we installed some catch fence, debris fence, but it wasn't all the way around the entire track. So I think the safety measures on those are kind of dimmed down because of the openness that they have to design the track, but also the far less spectators that they have on the campus.
Ruthie, is this a big part of the future of motorsports, seeing more of these club tracks developed?
Oh, for sure, because there's definitely a huge appetite for it. And the nice part about it is, because those of you that do have road courses that are in the facility, you can obviously change up your configuration based on, you constructed it that way, so you can change up your configuration based on the knowledge and ability of your client. But one of the things I have noticed that has started cropping up is that sales for all things four-wheel are starting to go through the roof. And so a lot of folks that have enough property to be able to do it are starting to construct off-road courses. And the appetite for that has really drastically increased in the last, say, 4 or 5 years. I mean, Honda will even tell you that their sales are through the roof right now with, all things side by side and four-wheelers. So one thing to think about, if you have enough property, to do it, that's a pretty big niche. I know Polaris is also looking at expanding some of their programs as well. There's a couple of others that are doing so as well. So just a heads up for you, if you're looking to maximize some of the property that you already have, that I think is going to be a future programming play for a lot of different promoters.
We hear a lot of buzzwords nowadays, and one of our favorite ones is sustainable and sustainability. Kristen, can you talk a little bit about working sustainability into new track design?
Yeah, sustainability is that topic we talked about today of EV vehicles, for example. And when we discuss about sustainability on a track, we have to differentiate between, first, is it an event track or is it a private track? So an event track, actually, interestingly enough, the motorsports activity, I think, only represents, less than 10% of the environmental impact. When you have people coming to your track, it's actually the people driving to your track, flying in there by a plane, taking a car. So that is really sustainability of a racetrack is much more about the other things that we don't consider immediately. People go like, oh, you're driving with combustion engine cars. Less than 8% of impact is happening with these cars, actually. So what we're looking at for sure is how can we incorporate these trends. Sustainability is one of the key topics. Formula One is putting a huge push into that through their carbon net zero initiative by 2030. It's extremely ambitious, but what it's producing is that the sponsors basically are getting that pressure on. So if you want to be a sponsor of one of those events, you need to demonstrate sustainability on your end. So I think the industry is doing a lot for doing that. Yeah, if you are an event organizer now and you want to work with a promoter for Formula One, you need to look at every aspect basically. Yeah, so it's not that easy, and in our case we want to see how can we activate the infields and how can we place solar panels in there, how can we work on the infrastructure to have charging infrastructure. So it's a very, very complex topic that we have to analyze on multiple dimensions.
All right, Colin, I'm an old school guy, so anytime I see an old track brought back from the dead, I get excited. But a lot of these old tracks were kind of backwards when it came to safety. What's the biggest challenge when you try to upgrade an older facility to make it a little bit safer?
No, that's a good question, and we're really excited to see what NASCAR is doing with reviving some of these old tracks, or even shortening them, adding the street course in Chicago. That was just, I don't know if anybody watched it, but it was an exciting race if you like crashes. And and on the safety aspect, everybody was safe, even the ones that crashed. A lot of times it was 6 cars at one time in one specific turn. So it's exciting to see what they're doing with the new concepts, but also going back to the older tracks and reviving them. I would say one of the main issues, and it's kind of funny because the older tracks seem to be better built than the newer tracks, and we always run into how strong the concrete is if we're trying to drill those walls, or the intense rebar patterns that these older tracks have. So we run into issues if we can drill into those walls to add safer barrier, or catch fence is another thing that we do on a lot of these new tracks that we're reviving. But for example, at the Milwaukee Mile, drilling into that and adding those H-beams, one, they're huge, but two, the amount of time you spend drilling those things in, and some of the ones we can't. So, we've dug holes 18 feet in the ground and put H-beams in there to support those walls again. And we've also added new concrete structures because we had no other way to support this new catch fence or add safer barrier to these areas. So it's exciting to see what they're doing with these new tracks, and just the strength on some of these concrete barriers that we have to deal with each day.
All right. Probably the most unfair toss-up question that I will ask you. because you could go in a million different directions with this one. We're talking about the future of motorsports on this panel. How different might that future look?
I know he's staring directly. Just no pressure. Just put the camera right in my face, right? That's awesome. And by the way, I'm going to go with the whole excuse of I'm older, so I'm built better. I like that. I'm sticking to it. You know, I mean, to the earlier comment today that, you know, on the one of the earlier panels about, you know, 20 years ago we said we were all going to be driving flying cars, right? Well, now one of the biggest conversations we're all talking about is everybody wants to be EV friendly, right? But nobody has enough power to get it done because you can't have enough power to get to the facility. So, you know, every time I think we take a couple of steps forward, there's always kind of a weird hiccup that seems to knock all of us back a few notches. But I do think you're going to start seeing motorsports get a little bit more flexible in terms of audience, in terms of what products are actually at the racetrack. I also think you're going to see it not so much be about, when we all know the Long Beaches of the world and the events like that do so well because there's other things in addition to racing. So I always tell everybody, you know, if you're going to step up to the plate and try to do something on a more of a sanctioned body level or bring in a sanctioned body, think about what else you have to entertain the crowd, because you know, the younger generation, they're not car people. I mean, I know I have a ton of friends who's got kids that are 18 years old and they just give them an Uber budget because it's cheaper than buying them a car and paying for car insurance. So that, I think, is one of the challenges I think we're all going to be up against a little bit is you know, we joke about, I sometimes joke about the older demographics, you know, it's 55 to dead, right? But those are your passionate, and, you know, they're the ones that typically have the most money, especially from a club track perspective, to bring a product out and put it on the race course. So again, how do we educate and encourage some of these younger kids that are just not that enthusiastic about the car culture? So I think that's going to be something on all of us to try to push forward for the future is, you know, again, you try to have conversations with some of these younger generations, and they have no idea what you drive. They don't care what you drive. They don't care what they drive. You know, it's when in doubt, call an Uber. So things for all of us to think about for the future.
Quick question. Do you guys see the integration of sim racing into racetracks?
Formula E does a brilliant job of it. How many people have been to a Formula E race? Speaking of silent racing, which is bizarre. Formula E actually, before every single event, they have an entire bank of simulators, and I would say probably 25 to 30 of them, and it's a combination of battling against the crowd as well as with the race car drivers themselves. And they do a really, really good job of, you get to race against a driver on the course that they're about to run on. So from that particular standpoint, I think that's an amazing activation. I also know it's extremely expensive. So that for sure, I think that's depending on the market, depending on the sanction body, and depending on your audience, I think that's a great crowd pleaser. But again, it depends on what's on track and who your audience is or who your customer is at any one given point.
And I guess the follow-up question, because I had this conversation with my son. My son's 13 years old, and RC racing. And it's racing, but when I think about like pulling in a younger demographic and keeping them entertained, right? It's no different than the, you know, baseball fields having family areas, right? To keep all parties involved and at the track longer. Do you see anything like that potentially or being talked about?
Yeah, and some of the racetracks, depending on, you know, what you're going to or what sanctioned body's participating, IndyCar, F1, et cetera. I mean, you'll see some of the RC stuff is like Traxxas. You know, they have a lot of stuff going on where they build like really cool racetracks, and I crash every single time. I can't even make it out of a straight line on one of those things. I'm a debacle. You don't even want to see me on a karting course. But I do think that type of engagement works well with the younger generation. The hard part is, how do you transition them from RCs to sims to actual real life? There's a kind of a big disconnect there, right? And I think that's where we all need to kind of put our heads together and focus on how do we translate out of that.
Christian, a final word?
No, look, I think, like you said, motorsports is incredibly growing still. Everyone tries to look into the future and say where we're going to. At the moment, let's say from 100 requests that we get as a company, 80% are towards private motorsports club worldwide for sure. So that's a huge trend that we are seeing, and we are joining people. I think the business case is there for these people. And then fortunately, we are now surfing the wave with Formula One. I don't know for how many more years. Formula One is doing incredible. Many people saw it 5 years ago. I did Mexico in 2015, and I thought Formula One is over. I thought it's my last track, and now it's as good as never. So it's sometimes really so difficult to predict. I thought Formula E would do amazing. Then I went to a couple of races, fell asleep, and then I said, maybe it's going to take a couple of years. But it's incredibly difficult to look into the future. I think we are addressing all of the right topics here. I think these conferences are great just to work together, to exchange, and to learn from each other. I think that's one of the most important things. I think most of us are in a non-competitive position here, and this is the good thing about these conferences. Just learn from each other, incorporate new ideas. So congratulations to you guys.
Well, thank you. Colin, a final word.
Yeah, I think kind of just piggybacking off what Christian said, the future of motorsports, really hard to pinpoint. My experience is, you can have 3, 4, 5 crazy years as far as new builds, new street courses, new projects that you're working on, and then it kind of gets quiet for a couple of years before it ramps up again. The safety is always going to be changing. We're going to have to keep up with the times. To keep the business going, but also to stay in the world of racing. And thank you to you guys for bringing these rooms together of like-minded people. And a lot of times it's the funnest part of it is working together, figuring out these problems that we all run into on projects, and then the big payoff with a successful event or a fun race or whatever it may be that we all get to see. So any of the private tracks, if you do want to add more safety specifications to your project, give us a call. We'd love to work with you guys. So that's my shameless plug.
All right, Ruthie, take us home.
Well, I think we all know that sports in general are cyclical, right? I mean, every year if there's somebody else comes out on top, MLB's having a good year, or NBA, or the NFL's pretty much a standard. Let's all take that as gospel. But I think all of you have such varied goals. You have varied customers. You have varied environments. So the bottom line is, pay attention to what the trends are. But the reality of it is, your future is what puts cash in your pocket, right? So, Autobahn, obviously, what you guys have going on at your facility is very different from what Flat Rock has going on at their facility. So what's bringing revenue into your door may not be the same as what they're looking into bring in the revenue in their door. So, I mean, obviously, to me, it's just pay attention to the trends, be as transparent as you possibly can with, with what your goals and objectives are, and then just as long as you stay focused on that path and whatever's bringing money in your door, that's your future.
All right, before I mention the top 3 things, I need Mr. Tim Frost to come to the podium because we have an award to give away. So stay put on the stage as well. What did we learn? Well, we learned the cost will keep the street circuit schedule from getting out of control. That's good news. We also learned that track design has to work in safety, sustainability, EV use, and try to look into the future in order to get the whole equation right. And the club track business is wide open for even more growth. So folks, stay on the stage. Give these folks a round of applause. Tim.